And we are live with our 41st, say that right? 41st episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back once again. This is going to be our last episode of the year. So apparently we made it to 41 episodes. We missed a few here and there, like a few weeks, but we can't do it. We got to leave you wanting at some point, right, Ken?
Yeah, or just because, we get busy and have stuff going on. So, anyways, that aside, I guess we should talk. So we do have a special guest tonight. And before we get to introducing Will and talking through all the things he's doing, the things he's done, and cloud security and things like that, as you may know, we now do an AppSec Minute. We started doing that, 5, 6, 7 episodes ago?
Yeah. So this week on the AppSec Minute, we wanted to talk about finding hidden files and directories. There was a Medium post that came out, I'm not sure, within the last week. Looks like from a bug bounty hunter or bug bounty security researcher, I guess, on medium.com. We'll post the link up in the different channels. But basically, it harkened back to a time that we had a discussion about it, Ken. Me, you, Chris Gates. It was something that he does often when he was doing recon for red teaming. But one of the things that is identified often is the .git directory. So developers have a tendency to leave these files around and actually push them out to production or test instances. And those directories can be used to recreate a full branch of the source code, which includes any of the secrets that happen to be hidden in there. So the one thing that I wanted to talk about was recognizing the difference between 404 and 403, right? So if you hit a .git directory, like example.com/.git, and you get a 404 error, that means that the directory is not found. If you get a 403, it means the directory is there, but you can't actually see a listing of it. And there's ways that you can go about just identifying the files that are in there. Like .git is a known format. That directory is in a known format. And you can pull back different files based on what they have to be named inside of .git for Git to be able to function, right? Ken, what else did...
No, you're right. So there's a couple points there. One is that, if you've got if you've got access to a .git folder, like literally like example.com/.git, and you can, I forget exactly the mechanics of how it works because it's been a few years since Chris and you were talking about this, and he was actively using this as a red teamer, I think at the time he was a consultant. I can't remember. Anyways. Basically, the Git there's an index, and based off that Git index, you can reassemble the objects and basically reassemble the source code. So you don't necessarily need to go to a /.git and then have each individual file there. All you need is really the index to be able to and the associated object folders. I believe is how it works. Again, it's been a while. But I think that's the part you talked about with 404 and 403. Years back, Rob Fuller did a post on Dirbuster and exporting the Dirbuster database to Burp. That was something he and I both were actually doing. And someone asked, why would you guys do that? And the reason was that you can't go purely by response codes. They're helpful. Like you're saying, where you get a 403, maybe there's more, assets within that folder, or, you could do some recursive, essentially brute forcing discovery on that file path. But point is that it's not always a response code that matters. Sometimes it's the actual length of the response and other factors that you take into account. And that's where Burp Suite's intruder tool was using Dir modularity there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so that post has a good write up of how it actually works, right? And what you're saying is exactly right. Like you go into the index and you actually figure out what the objects are, and then you can pull the different objects based on what's on the index, and then actually do the recreation, right? So it walks you through those different steps. The interesting thing was that he took it a step further. So he talks about Git, but he also talks about Subversion and some of the other tools that are out there that developers use. I mean, if you look at the top of that article, what he talks about IDE configuration files as well, which is one that, I don't know if it's necessarily in my list. I need to go back through and look, but that's one that we do see within those project source files or source directories all the time, is those IDE files that could have some sensitive content in them as well. So there's a whole bunch of other types of files that you want to make sure you're looking for when you're running an assessment, it's low-hanging fruit when it really comes down to it. If any of that's included, it gives you a whole bunch of information about the project, the application, how to exploit it, or how to, other interesting things to look at, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, we usually talk about source code review. We usually talk about a lot of other things, but there's definitely like that. Like that's one of the first few steps in my dynamic testing methodology is that kind of discovery. So,
yep. So make sure it's included in your discovery, and hit us up on Twitter if you want to talk about it. If you got other techniques that you use, or jump in Slack, we'd be interested to talk through that. So. All right, so that covers AppSec Minute for today. Now we're going to actually introduce Will, since he's been sitting there so patiently. Will is actually, Cam, why don't you go ahead? You've got it up in front of you.
Well, Will's a senior security engineer at Netflix, but more so than that, Will and I finally got to meet you in person at AppSec USA, which was nice. Yep. Like, meeting somebody off Twitter in person, it's always nice.
Definitely.
So I think, I forget. Yeah. Somebody from NCC, I think, or something like that. I mentioned
Clint.
Wanted to meet you, and Clint.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Clint. Absolutely. So yeah, it was nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
And thanks. And if you don't know Will, which I think, like, to be honest with you, I think most people who are watching this podcast probably do know about you. But Will's recently done an AWS reInvent talk. He's spoken at AppSec USA, AppSec Cali, All Day DevOps, TEDx. You did a TEDx in El Paso?
Yeah, my hometown.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah,
very cool.
It was fun.
That had to be like nice to go back home and do like because I mean that's a professional sort of like platform for speaking. So it's kind of a big one, I think.
Yeah, it was neat. It was really great I was humbled to be invited, and it's great to go back to El Paso and kind of contribute back to that community. I go back often, but it's great to go back in that format.
Nice. Yeah, that is a great opportunity. And I watched some of the talk, and kudos to you. You're a good speaker.
Oh, appreciate it.
Besides SF and Bay Area, you're part of that OWASP sort of leadership team?
Yeah. For I guess for 3 years now, something like that. Back when Michael Coates was running it, he put out a call for, hey, who wants to help? And actually, myself and Travis being the chapter leader, met at the place at the restaurant. We were waiting for the meeting to start, and I overheard him talking about static analysis for Go using this tool Gas. And I was like, oh, I love that, but more specifically, I love Bandit. And he's like, I wrote Bandit, and like the relationship has started, right? And
that is awesome.
Now, since Travis has taken over the reins, joined him there at the AppSec or with OWASP in the Bay, and we actually both joined Netflix, and we coordinated our start dates. So we joined the same team on the same day. It was kind of nice.
Yeah, I mean, when we've talked, so this has come up before, like how do I get into the professional AppSec realm? And like it really does, putting yourself out there and going to these meetups and just volunteering for things and attending ends up like that, like you end up being some like-minded folks.
Yeah, definitely. It's such a small world, and everyone that I've actually interacted with in our community has been great.
And it's funny because we actually talk about Bandit a little bit in our Seth and I when we talk about Python source code analysis. So it's kind of funny.
Nice.
Well, maybe we should have Travis come in and tell us about, talk about actually building it. But no, we'll get into that. Sorry, I'm interrupting. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's not super formal. And sorry if there's some noise. Doing a little bit of remodeling, and so there's a lot of activity going on. So one of the things we typically get into are it's your origin story. By the way, I noticed you worked at Cigital, which I did not know actually until I was doing a little homework on you, and that's interesting because Cigital, some good folks have and had worked there, like John Steven. Katrina, how do I'm going to butcher the name. I think it's Katrina. Yeah, sorry, Cassine. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I always I'm the worst with being able to remember how to correctly pronounce names. So, but anyways, so yeah, some good folks came from Cigital. So what was your role there? I'm curious.
Cigital, I was just a senior security consultant. I was out of the Texas office. I'm from Texas originally and moved out to the Bay Area a little over 3 years ago. But I was just doing consulting in Texas for them out of the Dallas office and supporting local and remote clients, doing a little bit of everything from like ARAs to red teaming and physical like pen tests.
Oh, nice.
And once again, like a super small world, I met someone in person at reInvent that used to work at a client that I worked at and had heard of a story of a physical pen test I did at that client after he left. And it was like this small, he worked at this client. I had done a physical pen test right after he left. And then, years later, he had heard about the story and this mysterious guy from Cigital and then figured out that it was me. And then we actually connected at reInvent.
That's awesome. And honestly, physical, oh my God, I love physical. So I've done only, I want to say one client, but multiple times of doing like physical penetration testing or like whatever, just trying to really get in. Right. That's so much fun. I'll be honest with you, I don't find the same like adrenaline thrill from AppSec as I do that.
No, that's definitely the adrenaline rush and like the closest to being a spy that I'll ever get probably.
Yeah. Cause you're not trying, I mean, you're trying not to get caught. Try not to set off any alarms. You're trying to get like we didn't get to the data center, but the team we ended up partnering with, like another company we ended up partnering with on follow-on years, actually got into the data center, which is like taking pictures, of them their team inside the data center. So those types of things are like, yeah, what a lot of fun, or it's a lot of fun. So.
Yeah, no, that story that the guy had heard of, I had actually crawled up into a firewall to try to break into a device room and dropped a gallon tea jug on the door handle to latch the door open.
That's pretty creative.
And when my teammate went to like reproduce the steps to show him how he got in, like the tea jug actually exploded on the door handle.
Oh, that's how you make a name for yourself.
Yep. Yeah, good times.
Awesome. Yeah, the crazy stuff that. Well, I mean, and actually, I guess we can go back and trying to understand. I think one of the reasons we asked this about the origin story is trying to understand like is there any common denominator between folks who end up in security? What age did they sort of like? What events and what age did it sort of become like? I think this is the security path is for me. And just really like, kind of showing your progression and how you got to be where you are now. Discussing, kind of walking through that. So go as far back as you need.
Sure. So I was born on I think, back in 6th grade, I took a computer course in middle school. And I always say that I knew the internals of Windows better back then than I do now. I spent so much time on a computer learning how to do HTML and just the internals and that was back like AOL days with punters and, all the fun stuff that used to exist. And I kind of, just fell in love with computers. Kind of forgot about them when I went to high school. I played baseball and football and kind of did the athletics thing. But senior year took a programming course and used to send like viruses back and forth to my friend as we learned how to program. Like click on this and watch the CD player eject rapidly until you actually reboot your computer. Just like harmless shenanigans. But I actually wanted to be a doctor, funny enough, like an orthopedic surgeon. I had played sports. My sister was in school for medicine or pre-med. And it wasn't until like, as corny as this sounds, like I saw the movie The Recruit with Al Pacino and Colin Farrell.
That's a good movie. That's a good movie.
It's my favorite. Colin's like the hacker that gets recruited by the CIA. And I was like, that's what I want to do. So I applied to the NSA student program, didn't get in. But at that point, I was kind of set on computers. I went to study at Texas A&M and kind of just forgot about security-ish, like the hacking perspective, and just went to school for software and hardware. Started working at Raytheon in college. And then fell back into security like through just my progression there at Raytheon. Started as an embedded software developer, did a year rotation in hardware and firmware, and then slowly got into like anti-tamper and reverse engineering. And that's where it like really kicked in, like, oh yeah, the security thing. I used to like this a lot.
It rekindled your sort of passion for that, I guess.
Yeah, no. And then they had this cyber professional program. It was like a 6-month boot camp where we covered everything from, reverse engineering and fuzzing to network attacks and stuff. And so I went through that and then couldn't really find, or I guess during that whole time I was doing a master's as well in security and setting up home labs and those kind of things. But I couldn't find a position at Raytheon that really meshed well with me, and I ended up leaving to Cigital. And that was interesting because I was lucky enough to just rotate from project to project. I was one of those consultants that never said no, even if I didn't know how to do it, and just figured out how to do it and spent the time. But that year at Cigital was like one of the best years of my career because I got to see so much, so many different industries, so many different assessment types. It really kind of expanded my view of security and my experience. And from there, I went to Lockheed Martin to kind of be a consultant there as well, an internal consultant at Lockheed as well as external. So at that point, I kind of did the best of both worlds. I got to do consultant on the private side as well as consultant internally on the government side, and actually got to move to Japan for 6 months to run security operations for the F-35 program over there. And then while I was over there, a buddy of mine from Cigital recruited me out to the Bay to go work for a healthcare startup and helped him run that security team and kind of build that out for a year and a half before getting the opportunity to come down here to Netflix. And so I've been here almost 2 years now. The time's really flying and been working on a lot of fun cloud security things and learning what it's like to operate at scale.
Yeah, no, really no joke scale there too. I mean, one of the things you mentioned is like sort of an intangible skill. Because you had mentioned like I was sort of one of those consultants that just figured stuff out. And in reality, like that's always a hard thing. To be honest with you, that's exactly what you want. That's what I want when I like hired somebody. I wanted somebody who could figure things out. At the same time, it's hard to gauge that. Well, it's hard to gauge that from an interview, certainly, but also like, sometimes that sort of like melds into the whole, I don't want to say like the reality is as a consultant, you've got billable time, right? Mm-hmm. And you've got where like there's always that line we talk about where like there's how much bleeds over from work time and the hours that you're putting in, like 40 hours or whatever billable time, and like how much extra do you have to do for the R&D part of that for figuring it out? Is it baked into billable hours, things like that. So, but going back to the original sort of point here is that like that is a great skill, being willing to just kind of figure things out.
Yeah,
Seth, I think you're gonna say.
Yeah. No, I was going to agree with you, right? Like, Ken and I met at Fishnet, like under similar circumstances, though, right? Is like the people that prosper kind of in that consulting world are it seems like the hungry up and comers that are willing to dive in and figure something out, right? Knowing that, hey, guess what? I know 80% of this. So I am willing to put in a little extra time to get that extra 20% so that I can do this as I'm moving forward, whether that's something like an OSCP or training, but even like, hey, I just, I know what a network's supposed to look like. So let's go and, scan it. And I should be able to tell that, this is running on a weird port or this is different, that kind of thing. I mean, is that your experience too, Will?
Yeah, no, definitely. Like I think I've always been one that's been really thirsty for knowledge. Like I still remember back at Raytheon, like never just completely happy with just writing software of my bit, wanting to understand the entire system. And I think I've continued to just pull that through as I've done my career. And so always, wanted to learn more. I didn't know how to attack SFTP, but I'll go figure it out. Like I know how it fundamentally it works. So let's see if I can break it. And kind of just always wanted to learn more and more and more. And I just took it as an opportunity to, if I never said no, I'd never stop learning and just hopefully would never fail in an engagement. And if I did, well, then that was a learning opportunity and I'd know at least some bounds that I shouldn't cross, at least immediately again.
I mean, I'll be honest. I've always struggled with being semi-judgmental in the sense, and so now that we're talking about it, it's the only time I've really thought about it, I guess, is that, like very much being able to pick up a book or browse the web and figure things out. The people that I usually like working with and the people that I respect the most typically have that trait, but that doesn't mean that that's exclusive to. There's nothing wrong. There's different learning styles, and there's nothing wrong with needing to be trained. But I can certainly say like I've had that sort of like, I don't know, prejudice or judgmental view sometimes where I'm like, yeah, if you need to be trained, then like, and you can't figure it out yourself, like there's something off. But to be clear, now I realize that there's different learning styles. It's just, it's something you figure out as you get older.
Yeah, no, that was definitely something when I was, like helping build a team and trying to estimate how long it should take others to do work. It was one of those like judgmental things like, well, it only take me this long. Why is it going to take you this? That was very difficult for me to like sit back and say, okay, not everyone performs, and learns this way and can like come up to speed this quick. And it's definitely hard to, everyone learns their own way. Everyone comes up to speed in their own pace and you have to, be okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also,
similarly, oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, also it depends on the background, right? Yep. Like you talk about the internal stuff that you learned back in 6th and 7th grade, right? As you were going through that, I had experiences with that. Like we'd hire an intern or whatever. And I'd be like, okay, like I assume you have this base level of knowledge that has to do with like Linux internals and configurations and networks and, or even when you're talking to developers, and that's not always the case. They don't understand what opening a socket actually does, or, like how a network functions. And so even when you're dealing with something as simple as, hey, fixing some SQL injection or something like that, it just because you can fix it in 5 minutes doesn't mean that they can, right?
Yep, exactly.
Sorry, Ken, what were you going to say?
That's a hard thing to gauge. Oh, no, I was just going to say that, like in the same vein, like I genuinely can't sit still and sit in the classroom and absorb anything. Like I wander off too quickly. And then I start thinking about like, whatever. I get distracted is the point. I start daydreaming, real bad problem. And so I can't sit in the classroom. So again, somebody else coming from the other side, different learning style, they might say, oh, that person's just, whatever, they got ADD or they're whatever, or dumb or whatever. But it just comes down to different learning styles.
Yep.
So.
Cool. So Will, tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Netflix now. I mean, senior security engineer. That's what everyone that we talk to there is, right?
Yep.
That's the team. Yeah, what are you working on? You mentioned some cloud security stuff. You spoke at reInvent recently. Just kind of give us a rundown of what your current job and everything looks like.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm on the team that owns our AWS infrastructure security. So we own all of our AWS accounts and kind of the permissioning model starting at IAM and kind of that level up. So we're in charge of the AWS native infrastructure components. And then we work with other different security teams for various different platform stuff. But I spent the last probably couple quarters, almost a year now, focusing on how could we actually protect our credentials, like our AWS credentials, since everything at Netflix is running in AWS. How do we actually prevent or detect compromise? And so that's where a lot of my research has stemmed from recently. In July, I guess, I spoke at Black Hat on a new method for detecting credential compromise in AWS. So kind of like a simple machine learning model that learns as you run in the cloud and starts alerting on variations of where your calls are coming from. And then, to complement that, if you can detect, why not try to prevent? So something I've been calling key enforcement, or what we're calling API protect, which, how do you kind of describe your environment from a policy perspective and apply that strategically throughout your IAM roles to prevent keys from actually working outside of your accounts. And then, as I've been here and at different companies and seeing, blog posts on bug bounties, seeing that the server-side request forgery attack or XML external entity injection, the most common thing against cloud running services is attacking the metadata service. So how could you start to protect against that kind of attack, right? Could you implement WAF rules? You can to some perspective, but there's ways around those, right? So, could I use and leverage my position at Netflix to try to get help from AWS, and then understanding that attacking it at the AWS level from like the service level is a very hard problem due to the number of customers and the vast different deployment methodologies, and you can't just make a change and break people. That's a bad model,
Yeah,
surprising
for that.
Yeah. And then just trying to use our relationship to see if we can get some changes made to some libraries. I had done some research on what it would actually take to rotate a credential in AWS, because with the temporary credentials that EC2 servers get, right now there's currently no method to actually revoke a single credential. So you either revoke the entire role and take your entire service down, or you figure out a way to rotate it. And so I started doing this experimentation on if I had 1,000 node cluster, could I successfully rotate a credential across the entire fleet without taking the service down? And then I found out that the SDK, even though you can actually rotate a role on a EC2 instance, the SDKs that you use don't actually support that functionality. They don't know to look back into the metadata service to see that, hey, there's a new credential and this one that I was using has been revoked. There's a policy now on it that says it's not valid.
So to be clear, like if I built a Rails app using the AWS SDK gem, I pushed that application live. It had spun up and then used the AWS SDK to grab its credentials, presumably from like the metadata URL running on the EC2 instance, and that EC2 instance has a role attached to it.
Yep.
So it's grabbing the credentials for that role from that EC2 instance on that metadata URL. If I then, through the AWS API or console, changed the role associated with attached to that EC2 instance, then the code, unless it's, I guess you're saying, unless it's like respun up or something like redeployed, then it just doesn't know of the change and continues on.
Yeah, the way the SDKs are written are, if they're grabbing credentials from the metadata endpoint, that URL on the box, then they're going to cache those credentials in memory and not check for a new set until 15 minutes before expiration. So if you've actually rotated the role and then revoked the old role that was on the box, that cached credential would still be used until the expiration period. So you would potentially take your service down 1 to 6 hours, depending on when you actually rotated that role. Or so the idea is you would just, if you can, you'd bounce that service again with a new role, and that would be the way to rotate it. But at least I figured out that we can't programmatically rotate this across. So it becomes even more important to be able to prevent compromise. And so we started trying to see, can the metadata service support a header, similar to the GCP and those kind of things. Didn't really get the traction there. So I just started making PRs to the individual libraries. And so like the one I reference is my first PR was to Ruby. Funny enough, you mentioned Rails, right?
I'm always going to mention Ruby and Rails.
Yeah, he always mentions Rails.
So my first PR to the AWS SDK was for the Ruby SDK, where I built a POC proxy just to see what traffic looked like from SDKs to the metadata service. Saw that they weren't setting the user agent, and decided would they accept a PR to actually set that to something. So kind of described the SSRF attack and how this would allow you to build a proxy to mitigate it. They accepted it, and then I took that to the Java team, made PRs to their library and referenced that. Got them to accept and merge, and then I took all those to the Python team, and was like, "Hey guys, let's work together." And then I got those merged, and then I kind of took that and the relationship I have at Netflix with AWS to the global SDK team and got them to commit to not changing those user agents.
That is amazing. That is amazing work.
That's what the reInvent talk, it coupled my Black Hat talk, and then I flipped gears and said, okay, let's talk about preventing compromise. And that's where I unveiled the metadata work originally. And so we open sourced an example, Golang proxy. It's like 100 lines of Go that you could compile and put in front of your metadata service with an IP table rule and prevent SSRF of your credentials. So kind of just pushing that forward. And then now it's been moving to I had my next eureka moment, let's couple some things together and build this thing. And so I've been proving that out over the last 6 weeks and hope to maybe in Q1 next year, do another blog post about the evolution of the protection kind of life cycle that I've been working.
Nice. And actually, I'd come across this week. For Google Cloud, there's actually a version 1, I guess, API.
Yeah.
So that doesn't require the header. I mean, maybe that's what you talk about in your talk. I don't know.
No,
but,
I don't mention the Google piece in my talk, but I saw either a Shopify or some sort of HackerOne write-up that was showing the V1 beta endpoint. I was like, oh my God.
yeah, I saw that. I was like, that's how I saw it. I couldn't remember if it was through a bounty. The reason I was like, I saw it this week is I couldn't remember if it was through our bounty program or something I read. Is that hacker? You're right. Shopify HackerOne submission. So that was pretty sweet. And to talk about that for a second, from a server-side request forgery standpoint, I guess the header essentially so I can redirect a request, but presumably if I don't have if I can't do a CRLF and add a new header, then that's mitigated at that point.
Yeah, as long as you can't. Yeah, as long as you can't control the header, which my assumption in the SSRF case is that your SSRF and XXE vulnerability does not allow header control. So as long as you can state that, then and have this proxy running with the latest SDKs, then you can effectively mitigate that class of vulnerability against the credentials in your environment. And so that's something we've been pushing out and proven to be really effective for us.
Nice. And Scott Piper, who's on the chat, had said, we're going to keep yelling at AWS's metadata PM until they add that host header.
Yeah, I think that'll be really great when they do. It'll be interesting to see when they do that, how the actual rollout will be and how easy it'll be to just kind of say, use this metadata endpoint. And most importantly, don't have that V1 available. Learning from the GCP cases.
I found that report, by the way, Seth. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that SSRF in Shopify's exchange that led to root access.
Root access, yeah, do that.
That was a gnarly one because it wasn't just like, we have this SSRF. It was SSRF to credentials, which allowed me to put my own key, which allowed me to get on any instance. I think if I remember the chain correctly, it was pretty gnarly to like account ownership.
And I'm only chuckling because I'm like, that is pretty dang sweet. Not chuckling at Shopify because the truth of the matter is, I think everyone who plays blue teams, like always worried that that's going to pop up. And like you said, with AWS, like, and just Google Cloud, Azure, whatever, like that like SSRF is becoming like a really prevalent thing. And then you couple in with cloud services and being able to fetch credentials. And Seth, I know we've been talking about this for it's been mentioned here and there. Yeah. And it's a real problem.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem is not even it's not just code that you can control, right? It's not just the applications you write. It's any third-party SaaS app that you brought into your environment. It's not even like keeping it up to date. It's whether or not those avenues, those vectors have been found, and even if they've been found, how quickly can you get it patched and update? Because a lot of times you're relying on third parties or the vendor that you've chosen, right? So if we can get that down to the metadata service, that would be awesome. But until then, we've got at least have some sort of stopgap that you can put in place to protect your applications as well as those third-party applications you're running.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about third-party applications. It's also those third-party libraries, right? The middleware for Node and Rails and everything else. They do make requests out. They do, allow people to post data in, and then it's rolling that new stuff.
Luckily, there's never ever an issue where someone social engineers their way into taking over a popular open source library and then presents a backdoor and
social
code
by sending an email.
I was asking if I could have access.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't have to be hard to work, right? Or to be a good hack, right?
Yeah. I think that whole vendor attack supply chain is going to be the next big problem area. I've been running some typo squatting stuff with Travis and Scott Behrens on our team, and like little known fact, I own like 1,150 PyPy packages, and 1,140 like 41 of those are typo squatted, just to see like what would metrics look like, and preventing people from actually like installing. So all my packages, if you tried to install them, they will sysexit one or like log.fatal on the install so that you can't possibly get it to work. And it says you probably meant this package instead. Like I'm trying to drive people to the right package, right, and prevent someone from actually typo squatting those. But it's amazing to see. Like I get folks contacting me, hey, I can't install your package. Can you help me? And it's like, please read the error. You probably meant this one. Or I actually had a big company, like big name company, write me and ask me for a license to use my package. And because they wanted the popular package, like the real package.
Right.
But when they were looking up the actual, like whoever was doing the licensing, they're like, go look up Python JSON logger, right? And so they did it without the dash, and they're like, "Oh, Will Bengtson writes that. Let's email him and ask for permission."
$1 billion. You can have my.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
but so
amazing.
it's been interesting to see. We actually started forecasting, I don't know if you know Ryan McGeehan or Magoo on Twitter. He worked at Facebook back in the day, and but we started forecasting from a group, like what would it look like, or what's the chances that there's a huge supply chain attack through a common package. And so I started pulling some of my typo squat data to kind of feed that forecast internally with the group that he was running it with. And it's interesting to see like just how many PyPy downloads there are from just a pip install, not to even like think about the number of mirrors that are hosting it and what the installs would look like from there.
I am now following Magoo, by the way. I wasn't familiar. I never met.
Great guy to talk to, super smart.
Awesome. Well, added to the list of people to reach out to, I suppose. So one of the things that Scott Piper had a question for you, and it was to basically ask about Trailblazer and I guess CloudTrail not logging all of the API events. I'm assuming that means different services and their API events on those services within CloudTrail.
Yep. Yeah. So Trailblazer, taking a step back, is a library or a tool I wrote originally to help kind of enumerate the AWS API calls and then try to associate those back to what's actually logged in CloudTrail. And Scott's been really good at poking at it, and he did a PR that I have to look at to actually look at the services that I haven't actually looked at yet in full detail, and push the pieces there to actually make those pieces work. But the idea was, if you ask AWS what's logged in CloudTrail, they can't tell you because CloudTrail itself is a service provided internally to the different AWS services. So the CloudTrail team provides it out to the other service teams, and then it's up to those service teams to actually implement the logging themselves. And so when you get that, you get a bunch of inconsistencies in how things are logged. The error messages are inconsistent, as well as whether or not a call is actually logged or not. Does the team consider this a data call or a control plane call? And even if it's a control plane call, did they decide to log it or not? And so Scott's found, I think, recently that even some of the calls that you might consider control plane and IAM aren't being logged if they're not successful. And so Trailblazer was kind of the initial attempt to help enumerate those things. Due to even inconsistencies in the libraries within AWS, Scott has found that it doesn't necessarily work all the time. And so there requires some like one-offs for depending on the actual call. But it's a first, at least a jump start, and get the idea rolling that there potentially is a path forward to understanding everything that's called. But it'd be nice if there was just this master list somewhere. And when I first wrote Trailblazer, it started as I'm going to solve this CloudTrail problem, and it quickly pivoted to I could just use this to automate some attacks. So one mode of the one mode of Trailblazer is kind of the enumeration, and another mode is kind of like, hey, run this list of commands with these delays in these regions that I gave you. And so that's a mode that we run it most often is just, I want to run get caller identity plus a describe instance plus this, and because that's an IOC that we've heard about, and let's see if we can actually detect that in our environment.
That's cool. So you're you're doing some simulation. It's like purple teaming. You're doing some simulation, but also ensuring that your team's catching this, and that you're triggering, like you're seeing those events and you're acting on them, presumably.
Yeah. So we started doing this automation, kind of like random. Our AppSec team will do these random tests, and so now they can easily just string together the calls using Trailblazer. And then we can go back either in our logs to see, did we see that, or did the alerts actually fire because we have them set up. So we can use it from like a not negative test, but like making sure that our alert pipelines work completely like a CI, and know that like if this role calls it, then this should propagate all the way through to an alert. And if we get the alert and this test was fired from the system, then not page kind of deal. So we can use it from just making sure everything's continually working smooth to one-off. Like I want to just see can Will and his team actually detect this. So the AppSec guys can go into the system and feed a list of commands in a certain order and see like did the anomaly detection actually work.
That's how you do it at scale. That's awesome.
Yeah. So
Yeah. By the
Now
way,
I'm more interested. Like I haven't played with Trailblazer at all, but just out of curiosity, like how many services or how many calls, like what is kind of the percentage that you're seeing there that aren't actually covered and don't actually implement CloudTrail properly?
Yeah, so to be honest, I haven't actually fully enumerated the list. I bet Scott's run it more than I have. We did it service per service as we saw. And luckily, we have an internal tool that keeps track of every unique call that we've seen. So we have our own little master list, and Trailblazer was kind of built to try to help supplement that. But I think there's over 5,000 unique API calls within AWS, and I would be willing to bet that only half of those are logged, but not that I don't know for sure. Don't quote me on the true number. I'm not sure what Scott's seen. Is he's been spending more time in Trailblazer than I have. He's been giving it more love than I. But this I'm about to start the holiday break on Thursday, so I'm planning to give it the love that it deserves and actually get Scott's code merged in.
Cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned the holidays. I'm like worried with the holiday season. Like you said, people having time to work on the things they want to work on.
Mm-hmm.
And being a bug bounty first responder. So to know people like you are improving their tools during the time that bounty people also have like more free time. We'll see how this turns out.
I was going to say the same thing, right? Yeah. Like it's like, I mean, you can either do what the Sans Holiday Hack Fest, or it's like, oh, I haven't played with this. What bug bounties that are out there that actually do something X, Y, and Z. So I'm glad I'm not responding to it. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I go off call tomorrow for the rest of the year. So,
so you're saying it's okay?
Netflix
is open season after tomorrow. That's
I'm just saying I'm not on call. We have someone, but I can go play with my tools.
That's awesome that you have some free time for I mean, that's pretty. Yeah, it's a good couple of weeks. I'm sure some good stuff will come out of it. Just switching gears for a second. I know you training and are doing training. Can you tell people a little bit about that training, the AWS security training you've been giving?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess a side note, or like how I got interested in doing training is I teach a university course back home at the University of Texas, El Paso. And so I've always had like kind of this interest in teaching. And so in the spring, I travel back home once a month to teach in person and then teach remote the rest of the time. But I've always wanted to put together an AWS course. And I guess at Sigil, I did instructor-led training as well. So that's probably where it all started. But I started, hearing that people wanted some instructor-led AWS courses. Didn't really know of any. There's, the online AWS and those the AWS certifications. But I thought it might be interesting to put together a course and kind of just start from the beginning. Teach the things that I've learned over the years of operating in the cloud, especially here at Netflix, and kind of the gotchas that we've seen. And put together a course that can meet the most basic of person who hasn't touched AWS to those that have been running in AWS for many years. And so I delivered 3 or 4 classes at external this year in AWS on this AWS kind of security 101, where we cover the basics of each service and the gotchas and kind of how to put those all together. And so I did like AppSec Cali in January, AppSec USA, and a couple others I forget off the top of my head. But then also started teaching it internally here at Netflix from just like, here's what we want you to know about AWS when as a brand new employee. And so now I'm starting to think like, how do I expand that into maybe incorporate some of the research that I've been doing and turn that into like security monitoring 101. And let's throw kind of like flaws 2. Let's throw some CloudTrail out there and show you how you can detect compromise. Let's go to deploy Airbnb Stream Alert and throw some rules out there and show you how in real time you can see these environment changes. So now I'm starting to evolve it a little more into from a 1 day to maybe a 2 day. So the first day you learn the basics, and then the second day you put them into use. But it's been great. It's been really well received. I think AppSec Cali, humbly, we were sold out with a waiting list.
Nice. Wow. That's really, really good.
And we're going to do it again at AppSec this year in January. So, I take it as like even if you haven't, or if you've operated in the cloud, still a good opportunity to maybe learn something you haven't known, or just pick my brain. Like when we teach the course, we always say, our slide content is super basic, but we'll go as deep as you want in that area. So it kind of addresses any audience. And so as long as you don't care that I might geek out for 5 minutes on IAM and addressing a question, then, come join me.
No, I Seth and I have said the same thing to folks. We're like, you're like, oh, is it a problem if I have the slides or share them out? If the slides give you all of the course, then what are we doing? If that's that's the reality of security training, right? It's like you as a student should definitely be speaking up and picking the instructor's brain. Is there anything that surprises your students? Like, is there anything that as you're going through that day that, maybe folks who aren't as familiar with AWS security, they hear it and they're like, oh, that's surprising, or I really wouldn't have thought about that, and it's super important. Is there any sort of kind of consistent thing that pops up?
Yeah, from AWS, it's always like not everything is logged in CloudTrail is a big surprise to people. When we start talking about IAM and like the fact, I think it still exists that like if you were to delete an IAM role, it just goes away. There's no like preconditions that happen and see like, is this in use? So if you accidentally delete the wrong role, you took any service down using that role. So like it's just kind of those gotchas that we know of this because it's happened to us.
I know what happens when you delete a role.
Yeah, it's not a good thing, right? And we talk a lot about the most popular Netflix thing out there is chaos engineering, right? And so we talk about, kind of our regional deployment strategies. But when you look at a lot of things like DNS, IAM, those are all global. And so I still remember the first time I pushed out API Protect here at Netflix in production. It was the most stressful 6 hours of my life because I was pushing it out in batches, trying to be methodical about what services I hit and when. And but knowing that like if I took a service down due to a bad push, there's no like vacating a region to get out of that error. It's the entire service is down. And so that it's just kind of thinking through those methodologies that, if you're deploying in multi-region, maybe you haven't considered. And we've just operating at our scale, we've run into a lot of like hard limits within AWS. And so, those are the kind of things that, we can talk about. And like, I don't know how many people know the max number of instance profiles that an account can have, but we do because, we've run into it, and it kind of has shaped some of our architecture and some of the things that we've wanted to do, we can't do yet. And so I think that's what I enjoyed the most about is just like having those kind of conversations. And like, if you're in my class and you're trying to design something, well, let's talk about it. Let's run through that, and I'll learn something, you'll learn something, and that's what I really love about it. But yeah, those were the two things off the top of my head that like I can remember that really surprised people.
If I was to take your class, would I learn what Netflix's monthly bill looks like?
I don't even know what monthly bill looks like, but it's a lot. I think.
I'm sure it's pounds of money. I'm sure that's how that's weighed.
Yeah, yeah. I think from what I remember, right. Now, don't quote me on this because I've only been here 2 years, but like it used to be reams of paper when they had actually delivered a paper bill. Like it'd be like you went to Office Depot and actually bought a box of paper. Is like the bill that was delivered every month. I think. I don't know. I'm just glad I don't have to consolidate that bill every month.
I can only imagine. Yeah. So I guess as we're wrapping up here, since I think
It's already been an hour. Yeah.
We mentioned
Yeah,
it at the beginning.
Yeah.
You mentioned like it's going to fly by, and you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, I mean, it's always fun when you get to just, I mean, for us, it's really fun because we get to get folks like yourself on and just, we get to pick your brain and just ask you a bunch of questions, and it's easy for us, to just hang out. So,
Yep.
yeah, we love doing it. But yeah, I guess one of the things, Seth, I mean, one of the things we always ask is, like, is there anywhere that, I mean, you had mentioned AppSec Cali, so you're giving a course there. And we basically are trying to figure out, like, if people want to meet you or talk to you, where are you going to be at? What are you up to over the next, 3 to 6 months?
Yeah. So let's see, AppSec Cali, I'll be there all week doing a training alongside y'all. We'll be there at the same time. I'm actually giving a talk there as well. So I'll be around the AppSec area the entire week. So happy to meet up with anyone. I'll be at ShmooCon right before that, just hanging out, not speaking, but just enjoying a conference for once. And then after that is B-Sides San Francisco. I help organize B-Sides, and so I'll be there running that show with everyone. So I'll be let's see, that's March 3rd and 4th, and that's as far as I know so far. We'll probably
You got 3 months planned. Roughly.
3 months planned. I'll be at summer camp, I'm sure, just like every year, running around the Packet Hacking Village, and probably at Black Hat again, just attending. But yeah, the big ones are AppSec Cali and B-Sides. Two conferences that I help organize and am very, very fond of. But if anyone out there is attending and sees me, feel free, please stop me. Let's chat.
Throw something at him and say hello, right? That's usually how it goes. So what are you speaking on at AppSec Cali? Same.
Yeah, AppSec Cali is a repeat of my reInvent talk.
Okay.
And potentially the follow-on information if I can get everything done and published. If not, then that'll be probably later in the Q1 on our tech blog.
Come on, you got like 4 weeks. You're good.
I've got an entire holiday, right? So
yeah, you've got a holiday. You don't have to spend time with family. Don't worry, it's all good.
You've got tools to write and talks to work on.
That's right.
We're gonna hold you to this, Will.
Perfect. Yeah, and then I mean, a shout out. I'll be sponsoring students for B-Sides. Every year I've tweeted out that I've sponsored students, and I don't know if it's like the fear factor of actually like responding to a tweet. But every year, no one's actually taken me up on the student sponsorship. And so I hope to actually have people take me up this coming year when I tweet out that I'm sponsoring. It's kind of right now, I'm still waiting to fill my humble bundles from No Starch that I want to give away free books. And no one's responding to me.
So that's crazy. Yeah, you should. Yeah, that is crazy, right? Yeah.
Definitely hit us up when you're promoting, when you said you're tweeting out the sponsorship, so that we can make sure that we also distribute that out.
Retweet that. Yeah,
that'd be great.
Yeah. Well, along those lines, before we kind of call it today, right? Like obviously you've got your course. If somebody is getting into like cloud security and AWS security, like what is the first place that you point them at?
I think AWS just revamped a lot of their like security docs and just cloud docs, and that's always a good place to start. Just Googling, reading Scott's work. Our tech blog has some stuff as well. Just the internet is full of information. Careful on the Stack Overflow stuff you read. Don't just trust that out of the box. But
never.
But yeah, I don't actually have a go-to place to just learn. I just reading and playing with it. Set up an account. Free tier is amazing. You're 1 free year of AWS resources, up to an extent. That's just a great way to start.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, getting your hands dirty is always the way to go. I don't know. I always tell people that a lot, it seems like more and more of my job is just knowing how to manipulate Google to tell me what someone else has experienced in the same situation, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it is Stack Overflow, okay, take that with a grain of salt. But even like getting at the AWS documentation and other things, it's a lot easier to go to Google and say, hey, tell me where I find this, so I'm not digging around, clicking links in AWS. It's, it points me directly there. So
yeah, I'm on Google every day trying to figure out an example in Bodo of how to do something.
yeah, that sounds familiar. So I mean, that's a lot of our life as software engineers, AppSec, people, is being able to find the answers that we want.
Yep.
Cool.
And
well,
kudos
okay,
to
so
Bodo team,
Yeah.
because they Chris and I were trying to add some modules for Google and for Google Cloud, and it is not the same. The support is not the same. That's a very difficult environment in comparison. So kudos to the Bodo team that works on that.
Yeah, that team's great. Yeah, I'd agree.
Cool. Let's see. What else was I was? Yeah. So AppSec Cali, besides SF, hit you up on Twitter. I don't think we've actually mentioned your Twitter handle, but it is at __ muscles, right?
Yeah,
Is that correct?
yeah, that is
Is there a
correct.
story behind that, or is that just?
No, there's a story. So back when I started going to DEF CON, I was in like really, really good shape. I was like competition ready almost, I guess, from a bodybuilding perspective. And I was hanging out with the Wall of Sheep crew, and we were literally sitting there, and they were getting up to go out for the night. And they're like, come on, Muscles, get your ass up. And they were like, yes, we're going to start calling you Muscles. I didn't have a handle back then, like seriously just getting into the industry, and it just kind of stuck. But now it's great because like Men's Fitness and all those magazines follow me on Twitter, and I disappoint them every day when I tweet about InfoSec.
That is awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that is pretty impressive. So that's cool, right?
I'm gonna start tweeting bad workout advice, kind of like the bad DEF CON advice.
And bad diets, like fake diets that don't exist yet.
The Cheetos diet.
Could be really
the Cheetos
fun.
diet, yeah.
Cheetos and Pepsi.
Cheetos and Pepsi. That's it. I'll lose all the weight, right? Like, yeah,
Yep.
Sweet, cool. But follow you on Twitter. Yeah, I mean, we'll be interested to see what happens over the next month as you're pushing out the the next iteration of that stuff. It sounds like Scott was on the channel as well, talking through Trailblazer, and he's still enumerating as well. So he didn't have an answer for what was and isn't covered.
Yep, it's a hard problem, but I think we'll figure it out one day, I'm sure.
Yeah, you will, or AWS or Amazon will come out with something and be able to tell us definitively what's actually covered.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's great having you. Thanks for joining us for the night. Ken, did you have anything else you wanted to mention?
No, we got the t-shirts. So I think, and Will, yeah, we're going to contact you to make sure we get your size and your
thanks.
address to ship the t-shirts to, or t-shirt. Yeah, we're going to be at AppSec Cali as well. Yeah, I don't think so, Seth, other than like Will, don't drop off when we stop. Hang on for a couple minutes.
Yep.
And yeah, Seth, anything else?
No, I don't think so. Not at this time. Again, I wanted to thank everybody for supporting or listening this year. We got a lot of plans for 2019. Ken and I are going to kind of take a step back over the next few weeks and talk about where we want to take the show. So if you have suggestions or you have topics that you want us to cover, please let us know. Obviously, for the two of us, it's just this is what we want to do. We like to talk to people like Will. We learn a lot about the industry and about what we do on a daily basis. So it's been great. Again, we appreciate the listeners. We appreciate those that are taking part and really want to involve themselves. So thanks. And
actually,
that's what I've got.
What? Yeah, I would say actually on that note, you mentioned so when we come back with our next guest next year, it's weird to say that it's going to be the crew from Segment, both the security team and developers, and they're going to talk a little bit about like some of their SSRF prevention and DNS rebinding prevention and things like that. So it should be really, really a good way to kick off the new year.
Nice.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Will.
Thanks,
you, Ken.
This was fun. I appreciate it.
Thank you. We really appreciate you being on. And happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.